This is People on the Prowl, the book which I published in 1992, and then it was translated here. I'm going to read two short stories from here, if we have time. The first one, which is called Our Neighbor's Last Days. I'm going to start with that one. I'm going to just read, and then we can have a dialogue, maybe if we have time after I read, and questions and whatever you want to ask. Our Neighbor's Last Days. The episode that triggered everything was trivial. It may even be summarized in a few lines. After placing a prosthesis in his last patient's mouth, the prestigious orthodontist Hugo Schatzman, who also happens to be our neighbor in house number 8, leaves his office one afternoon to consult with his doctor about some inexplicable fatigue that overcomes him when awakening. The physician detects something more than a simple vitamin deficiency, orders X-rays of the thorax, discovers a shadow in his left lung. The second physician orders more tests that will determine after a week's time whether Hugo is going to die of cancer or if he is only a banquet that the Koch bacillus has organized in his body. The bacillus can be kicked out, but cancer is a different matter altogether. Anyhow, I will have to quit smoking forever. The patient tells his friends and neighbors gathered in his home that evening, and he smiles, probably at the irony contained in the word forever. That first smile gives his future gestures a certain aura of greatness, a transcendent quality that will grow during the week in the time we have left to confirm one or the other diagnosis, death or absolution. Hugo is dying on us. This is the feeling, the sudden certainty that takes hold of us all. At present, we have a shortage of martyrs. I commend that night to Sonia. At least this is moving. Please, she reproaches me, haven't you thought about Ana Luisa and their child? Of course, I acknowledge, feeling embarrassed. Ana Luisa and the child, of course. The next morning, at breakfast, I watch through the curtains as Hugo, who is up early, walks with determination toward his Toyota. Ana Luisa follows him seconds later and wraps a scarf around his neck. Everyone else is also looking through their sheer curtains, worried about both of them, who look like a well-adjusted couple. His leaving early to work at his office is probably well thought out. It is necessary to start leaving early, take advantage of every light hour, wake up at dawn, because the dark of night stalks Hugo, waiting to fall upon his neck and snatch him away from us. His unexpected doom gives him stature, while the rest of us, hiding behind the curtains, become prosaic and irrelevant. That day he returns later than usual, and we all go out to greet him with Ana Luisa. There is a morbid quality in the way we all pat him on the shoulder and make contrived jokes about the doctor's diagnosis. Somebody compares him to Marguerite Gautier and promises to give him a bouquet of camellias next Monday, a suggestion we all laughingly approve. The emphasis is obviously on tuberculosis, a collective strategy designed to dispel the other option, the frightening possibility of seeing Hugo in the hospital in a few months, penetrated by tubes, and then carrying him later in a horizontal position to the cemetery. Grateful for the jokes that act as a soothing balm to the pain that awaits her, Ana Luisa invites us for a drink, a suggestion that Hugo is delighted to agree to. At house number 8, we are all overcome by a feeling of paradoxical conformity. We realize at that hour of dusk, as the dying man's serenity dazzles us, that nothing, not even our friend's death, will take our futures away from us. The young women look at him surreptitiously. Some allow themselves to make brief eye contact with him. Death, the possibility of death, enhances his attractiveness. In their mind's eye, his body becomes a perishable material that must be captured visually, with their hands too, because soon it will be no more. We shall know on Monday. In the meantime, let's drink a toast. Nobody wants to leave. Near midnight, under the influence of rum and vermouth, I happened to comment on the news of the trial of Winnie Mandela in Cape Town. And why is she on trial? Hugo inquires. What is she accused of? Beating a couple of blacks to death in an alley, I explain. She alone beat to death a couple of blacks? I thought that's what the clerk's government was for, or any other bastard in his place. Her bodyguards, Winnie's bodyguards, also contribute to the quota. A heavy silence follows. In that case, apartheid is preferable, don't you think? I suggest. The government passes sentence in court, but the condemned may appeal. With the bodyguard, a 6-foot black with a club in his hands, there is no possible recourse. Later he goes to Winnie and tells the story in his own way. I just had to kill him, Chief. My explanation provokes a certain malaise among those present, shakes the crumbling wall of our convictions, now that our army of old rebels has been gradually decimated by government and public institutions. Sonia watches me from a corner of the room with a grimace of displeasure on her face. She is an unconditional fan of Winnie Mandela, that much is obvious. Those two black guys must have done something wrong to deserve being taken into the alley. I don't believe it, says Hugo finally. Neither do I, the others echo in a chorus. Death, even as conjecture, favors unanimity. Somebody alludes to the manipulation of news by international agencies, a hypothesis that pleases everybody, and Winnie is absolved without even having to appear in court. I am careful to keep my mouth shut for the remainder of the gathering, which lasts almost until 2 o'clock. Nobody is paying attention to the time. Such a meeting may never occur again. Returning home along the gravel path, Sonia expresses her disapproval. Why did you bring up the Winnie Mandela trial tonight? Did you think it appropriate under the circumstances? What circumstances? For a minute, she is baffled. What circumstances? I don't know, she concludes. It didn't seem proper to bring up the story of the two black men dropped in an alley. Well, all right. It might be better not to delve into such subjects around Hugo. This time I yield easily, with the sole purpose of ensuring myself a peaceful night's sleep. Once in bed, I fail to fall asleep, just as may be happening to the others in their respective houses. At dawn, the night already wasted, I reach some convictions. I regret being healthy, which is also probably the case with the others. I regret not having a decaying lung to spark some measure of consensus among friends and make me enigmatic and attractive to my female neighbors. On Thursday, 4 days before the final diagnosis, we repeat the get-together in our home. Hugo increases the attention paid to him with unexpected maneuvers. He tells us that he left his office early, premolars and cavities don't interest him anymore, and spends several hours at the National Library researching the deaths of famous men. Among others, he mentions Nelson, wounded by enemy fire at Trafalgar, torn to pieces in the arms of his faithful orderly, before whom he utters only one sentence, the kiss of death, Horatio. He mentions Sergei Yesenin facing a mirror in his hotel room, his veins cut, writing his last poem with his own blood. Goodbye, my friend. In this life, dying is nothing new. Finally, he mentions Mahatma Gandhi, who forgives his assassin before dying. These descriptions bring tears to Ana Luisa's eyes. The rest of us keep silent. This time, everyone retires early in a reflective mood. At night, where she thinks I am asleep, I hear Sonia crying in the dark. Once again, I regret the lack of a bacillus in my body. Any kind would do. The next evening, I run into Hugo returning home just as he emerged from his Toyota. He sees me and offers a melancholy smile with that contrived air of languor that has clung to his face in the last few days. I find him distant. a sure sign that new changes have occurred within him. This time, it's something big. It happened in his office, a kind of satori, a primordial revelation, precisely when he was about to fill a patient's tooth with some filling, in this instance, someone named Gutierrez. It never happened to me before, he says, still surprised. Have you read Borges, The Aleph? Of course. It was something like that, a sudden realization of everything that is and everything that has existed. Aware of his enthusiasm, I let him unburden himself about his own Aleph as he discovered it in Gutierrez's mouth on one side of the epiglottis. That's complicated, I say. How will you be able to continue your observations? I shall prolong his treatment, he says without remorse. I will find as many cavities as necessary, but let me tell you what I saw. His terminology disappoints me. As was to be expected, he expounds on the incessant and vast universe and speaks about a center to which all centers converge. Too well known, even to myself, who never reads any writer twice, not even Borges. On Saturday, we all get together again at our house. Hugo takes advantage of the opportunity to reveal to the others his discovery in Gutierrez's mouth, leaving them dazzled. Death, for others a defeat, is in his case a silver thread, a jump into metaphysics, although the items he suggests in his patient's mouth seem quite unappealing to me. Borges talked about cobwebs in old religious sites, unreachable deserts, playing cards, tigers and retreating armies. Schatzman speaks about all the games played by second-rate teams last year, his mother's closets in Melipilla, about all the molars he has pulled out during his many years of practice. He doesn't evoke infinity, but his audience listens respectfully to his enumeration. And Gutierrez's feelings? I finally ask. With all that Aleph floating around in his mouth, you must have put it in his eye for sure. The audience turns to look at me with disapproval. Sonia offers more wine and canapés to ease the tension and gives me a homicidal look. Sunday, nearing the final verdict, our spirits are depressed and we each seek refuge in our own home. Ignorant of the impending event, the children play noisily until sundown in the gravel-covered yard. Their voices, their usual fights, seem distant to us and real, as Hugo Schatzman's name will sound to us once we have lost him. It's cloudy and it's Sunday. Two good reasons to stay at home now that the wait for the diagnosis enters the final countdown. Tomorrow we will know. Death or resurrection according to the laboratory's verdict. In the end, everything turns out less dramatic than we expected. That evening, Ana Luisa and Hugo arrive smiling, arms around each other. We all step out to welcome them. Tuberculosis, Hugo announces, and we take turns hugging him. The lung can still be repaired with a number of punctures, the appropriate medicines, and some rest. The next evening, we celebrate the good news at his house. Somebody purchases a bouquet of camellias that is given to Hugo on behalf of all of us. Jokes surface with the champagne and other niceties, but nobody finds them that amusing. Now that we only have a demoted stereotype of Marguerite Gautier to laugh about without enthusiasm. Hugo tries sincerely to renew the mystique, to regain an air of tragedy. He points out that laboratories sometimes make mistakes. He insists on the Aleph issue, but someone asks him pointedly this time about the feeling in poor Gutierrez's mouth. Laughter drowns him out before he can even start to enumerate what he has found so far in his patient's throat. That night, once again, I can't sleep, neither can Sonia. I hear her turn and sigh impatiently in the dark. Don't you think that he looks very thin? She finally asks. Who? Hugo. He really looks as though he were terminal. In that instant, I understand what will happen. In the next days, nobody talks about Hugo, who is referred to just by his last name, Schatzman, the one in house number 8. The moron who was going to die. His recurring presence every afternoon offends us. as well as the yet imperceptible detail that he might be gaining weight and recuperating. We feel shocked by his confident attitude, which now seems trivial to us, making us trivial too. We wanted him terminal and transcendent, not immortal. Someone talks facetiously about running him down with a car if the cough bacillus fails. It is rumored that the suggestion originated with Ana Luisa herself. Better a traffic martyr than a dentist with a bad lung, say I, says she. It's not a bad idea, say I. Yes. Okay, I have another one. I think we have a lot of time before the dialogue. It's called An Empty Cage. I wrote this. This story I've just read was written in Chile when I went back from Spain, and I met again my old friends, the old Bolsheviks, which weren't anymore Bolsheviks, and. This one was written in Spain when I was living in Madrid in the 80s, and it's about Vienna, something that happened in Vienna, in the zoo of Vienna, which is called Schönbrunn, at Schönbrunn's palace. An empty cage. I arrived at the Schönbrunn Zoo, where I now live, by conventional means, with a horde of French, 2 or 3 Scandinavians, possibly a German, several dozen Japanese whose faces, all of them, I now see multiplied with some individual variations along the gravel paths of this enclosure. The visit to the Imperial Palace, just a few meters from the zoo, lasted a little over 1 hour. It was an exhaustive run through the Habsburgs' depressing halls, where the Austro-Hungarian Empress occasionally used to seek refuge with her innumerable progeny. Marie Antoinette among them the least fortunate of her offspring, who would crown her everlasting vanity under the guillotine. The guillotine? Yes. To be or not to be, of course, is the only authentic dilemma. It's difficult to explain why I stayed at Schönbrunn. I can't think of another reason except my first acute vision of the primates and an accumulation of unexpected considerations that led me to abandon the line of tourists, which at the time was weaving past the orangutan's cage. It was there, in a somber and damp place in the section reserved for simians, where everything changed, when I literally felt entranced by the orangutan and his disheveled, indomitable mane. A spectacle that made me stop, obstructing the monocorde flow of the visitors who took advantage of this circumstance to insult me in German and Japanese. That was the precise instant of alienation, the unforeseen flight onward. The orangutan, nesting nonchalantly among the tallest branches of a tree, watched as serenely, detached from the heterogeneous parade of visitors who ambled by the cage's bars. People willing to spend a year's savings going through cathedrals and palaces from one zoo to another, while a stoic Japanese tries to find with his telephoto lens the most photogenic angle of the orangutan, that corrupt replica of man the medieval scholastics suggested. But it is well known that for those inhabitants of the abyss, everything was a failed act of the divinity. The visit ended for me right there, lost in contemplation of the orangutan, who in turn observed me with intense curiosity, all of his senses concentrated in deciphering my humble being. At that moment, I fancied that everything was really reversed, that the corrupt replica of the divine humorist was ourselves, the visitors ambling by the cage, the grotesque crowd swarming around me on this side of the cage's bars, while the orangutan watched us from his enviable freedom from the other side, indifferent to our gestures and postures, watching us with his mocking eyes, the same impudent expression he exhibits whenever I return to his ambit, and dressing me with his stare, strengthening in me the conviction that everything was, is exactly reversed, and the cage is ours. That day, I decided to stay in Schönbrunn. The same night, I settled down in the vicinity of the pit where giraffes and tapirs dwell, the impare-hoofed mammals, as the annexed placard reads, and the so-called artiodactyls, those with double or quadruple hooves, the camel, the deer, the Nepalese ox. I built my hiding place there, a cave made out of rotting planks and bales of straw, after carefully pondering the most probable route that the zoo employees would follow. In view of the obvious neglect of the surroundings, I surmised that they seldom went into that area. I wasn't wrong. They limited themselves to deliver some bales for each cage now and then, and the site's inhabitants continued that way, undisturbed in their gastronomic routine, ruminating all day, chewing that diet exempt of all novelty. I organized my dwelling at the back of the site assigned to the giraffes, who gradually became used to my presence after treating themselves to a few furtive nibbles from my thatched roof, initially reticent with the new guest in Schönbrunn, a specimen lodged without authorization from anyone in the proximity of their cage, still dressed in his civilian rags, filthy and muddy, although even now enslaved to his few possessions, the bed of leaves and newspapers on which I lay every night, a camp I don't use anymore but keep for indecipherable reasons as a symbolic hindrance from the past to prove to whom? That at one time I was, me, the beggar of Schönbrunn, an honorable citizen. I fed myself naturally in a sporadic fashion, once in a while biting fearfully into the meat and vegetables that I managed to steal from a cage, except those of the felines. Felines? Felines. Felines. Felines, to avoid becoming an involuntary substitute for their usual diet. The zoo employees distributed the food at noon, a strange habit on their part, as though a leopard or a boar should follow the digestive patterns of humans. I know that they disliked seeing me roaming with obvious avidity around the containers of meat and fruit, fish for the seals, carrots and vegetables for the primates. Even when I was hiding among the bushes, they sensed my odorous presence and made comments in German, laughing uproariously until they discovered me crouching in their vicinity. Some of them would grab a stick, the rest surrounded me howling, laughing, supported by the rules and regulations of the zoo, ordering me to come out of the bushes and leave the place, staggering from malnutrition, empty-handed. I had nothing left but the slim chance of finding leftover food in the cages, some greens and vegetables snatched from the chimpanzees, or a tame macaque from North Africa, 2 or 3 coetas monkeys who shared their cage with a green monkey from Senegal, for whom they cared little. Sometimes they all ganged up on him for a beating, or stealthily grabbed him by the tail. It's quite understandable. It's not every day that someone can enjoy the company of a monkey of inconceivable coloring, impudent in his histrionics and green pride. This was also more or less what my presence provoked among the coitas employees of the zoo, always ready to wield a club, particularly a red-haired, hefty lad with a slobbering facial expression. On one occasion I decided to confront them. I had headed early to my den, but my uniformed adversaries had for the 100th time destroyed it, and one of the giraffes was calmly chewing on the remains. Desperate, without thinking about what I was doing, I ran to the offices of the zoo's entrance, where they all met in the evening on the terrace for a cup of tea before going home. Keeping a safe distance from their tables, I raised my arm and my voice. "Very well," I said. "You must be happy now. You have satisfied your wish for impossible redemption once more, you coitas of the devil. Go on. Feed the giraffes with my walls, destroy my home again, you grotesque messengers of the authorities, miserable puppets of scheduled labor, full-time jackasses with limited ambitions. Raise my refuge again, archangels of nothing, slaves to weekends and miserable salaries. repeat ad infinitum the ceremony of disintegration, devour my newspaper bed, burn my beams, let everything slowly rot. With my hands, I shall rebuild everything in another place in this zoo. I shall once again build my home, and yet again, and return to it at night to shield myself from your rancor. There was no answer. They all remained motionless, jaws dropped, the teacups suspended in their hands. Finally, the red-haired lad with the slobbering expression got up from his chair and went into the building, probably to fetch a club. I opted not to wait for confirmation. The next day, they were all angry, which had repercussions on the residents of the zoo. The coitas doubled the usual doses of slaps to the green interloper, and two sea lions started a match of reciprocal bites and fin slapping early in the morning. One of the employees got mixed up with the rations, spilling several taps of fish in the rhesus macaque's cage. I consider the prevailing confusion as my personal triumph. That first phase of my stay in Schönbrunn was not particularly easy to bear. Winter slowly undermined my health. Once in a while, I would dream of returning to the city and immersing myself in the opera again, to vibrate with some of Puccini's emotional calamities or a priceless solo by Ruggiero Raimondi in the penumbra of the Staatsoper, and perhaps settle again in a comfortable Viennese dwelling, protected from the city, tramways, bankers, and street musicians. I found solace in thinking that Diogenes lived in a barrel in the markets of Athens, and his meager diet didn't transcend the leftovers he could secure at the end of the day, that neither he could accomplish the return trip. At rutting time, when the primates and the rest of the zoo's inhabitants felt the urge to ostentatiously display their genital attributes and utter the howling that encourages desire, everything became more tolerable. At such time, I roamed in the vicinity of the vast place assigned to the mandrills, a cement platform surrounded by a pit filled with the cloudy and foamy waters that receive the simians' wastes, and simultaneously, nothing is done without a purpose at Schönbrunn, protects them from the crowd. That's where the collective ritual took place, a copulatory symphony that the males sang astride the females, spreading surprise and bafflement among the visitors of the zoo. More than one kid entitled himself to a slap because of his insistence on sticking close to the enclosure's bars. Anyhow, none of these reduced the wantonness and unrestrained passion of the mandrills, or the ceremony enacted by 2 or 3 males who gained the most advantage, tacitly dividing territory, and the more numerous females among themselves. The copulating was brief and devoid of preambles. Surrounded by his red retinue, the male waited until the reddish instrument jutted out between his legs, thus announcing his readiness for pleasure. One of the females decided then to come near. How did they assign turns? What unsuspected hierarchy determined the privilege of being the first? Offering her behind that calloused, red, bald portion of her anatomy, the male would couple himself to her with an air of aloofness, both crouching down and put an end to the proceedings in a few seconds, suddenly separating to return to their individuality soaked in sand and parasites. By evening, I was returning to my hiding place to free my hands from any earthen habit and allow them to stray down toward my crotch. My breathing labored, listening attentively to the moans and groans of the beasts in the distance while the day was coming to an end in Schönbrunn's gardens. Amid the croaking of a bird in some remote corner and the constant ruminating of the giraffes in the adjoining cage, from tapir and zebras likewise, an irreplaceable melody that preceded the night like a delicate backdrop to my panting in time to feverish messaging of my instrument in the shadows of my cave. But no problems last 100 years, they say, and the exposure to the elements, the harassment by the coitas employees were not an exception to this blessed rule that frees us of the worst misfortunes. I found it at the end of winter, in April, when I wandered into unknown areas of the zoo, into the section assigned to flamingos and ducks, swans and quails, all piled together in a fenced pond on the east side of the zoo. There I discovered the subterfuge I had been longing for. It looked as though abandoned for several years. The bars were covered with rust. There was a listless tree in the center, gnawed by termites and freezing temperatures. An empty cage. An empty cage in the heart of Schönbrunn. It happened by successive visits with the spring's arrival. A few days later, I returned to the area to confirm that it was still there. Somebody, perhaps one of the senior employees, had the courtesy to open the side door for me one day, like a promise whispered in my ear, and one sunny Sunday in May, I vaulted into the cage. That night, I slept curled up by the trunk of the tree. On the following days, I wandered through the neighboring areas. Not far from my place, I found a small wood board. With a piece of charcoal, I wrote on it, "Mammal of the subspecies Eutheria, warm blood," and hung it on the bars in view of the public. One of the employees remarked to me later when he brought my food that the bit about warm blood was redundant. The next day, a Japanese and 2 Italians came to take my first pictures.